There's something you've been feeling, and you haven't been able to fully explain it. Not to your friends, not to your family, maybe not even to yourself. It's not loud. It doesn't demand attention, but it's there quietly pulling at you. A sense that something is shifting, that who you used to be doesn't quite fit anymore. And right now, there's something important you should know. You're not losing yourself. You're meeting yourself on a deeper level. Because growth doesn't always feel like progress. Sometimes it feels like confusion, like distance, like everything that once made sense suddenly doesn't. You start questioning things you never questioned before. Why you stayed in certain situations. Why you tolerated things that drained you. Why you kept playing roles that were never truly yours. And that can feel uncomfortable, even isolating. Because when your awareness begins to expand, your environment doesn't always expand with you. You begin to notice conversations that feel empty, habits that feel heavy, connections that no longer align with who you're becoming. And for a moment, it can feel like you're drifting. But you're not drifting. You're outgrowing. There's a difference. Outgrowing is not a loss. It's a transition, a quiet release of what no longer resonates to make space for what does. And the truth is, this phase you're in right now, it's one of the most important phases of your life. Because this is where awareness deepens. This is where you stop moving on autopilot and start seeing your patterns clearly. You begin to recognize your triggers, your emotional cycles, your reactions, not with judgment, but with understanding. And that changes everything. Because once you see clearly, you can't go back to being unconscious. You can't unsee what you now understand. And that's where real transformation begins. Not in some dramatic moment, not in a sudden breakthrough, but in small, quiet realizations. The moment you pause instead of reacting. The moment you choose peace instead of chaos. The moment you walk away from what once felt familiar, but no longer feels right. These moments may seem small, but they are powerful because they are evidence that you're changing. And here's something else you need to understand. Feeling disconnected sometimes is part of becoming more connected to yourself. When you're evolving, there will be spaces in between. Spaces where you don't fully belong to your past, but haven't fully stepped into your future either. That in-between space, it can feel uncertain, but it's also sacred, because it's where you rebuild, where you redefine who you are without pressure, without expectation. Just truth. And during this phase, you might feel like you need answers, like you need clarity right now. But growth doesn't always give you answers immediately. Sometimes it gives you awareness first, and expects you to sit with it, to reflect, to process, to understand. And that takes patience. So if you've been feeling different lately, more aware, more introspective, more distant from things that once defined you, that's not a problem. That's a sign that you're waking up to yourself. Not in a mystical, exaggerated way, but in a real, grounded human way. You're starting to see your life more clearly. And clarity can feel uncomfortable before it feels empowering. But don't rush out of this phase. Don't force yourself to go back to what feels familiar just because it's comfortable. Because comfort is not always alignment. And right now, alignment is what matters most. Be honest with yourself about what you feel, about what you need, about what no longer fits. Because the more honest you become, the more peaceful your life begins to feel. Not perfect, but real. And that's where true strength comes from. So take a moment. Breathe. Reflect on where you are right now. Not where you think you should be. Not where others expect you to be. But where you truly are. And instead of resisting the changes within you, lean into them. Trust the process, even when it feels uncertain. Because something important is happening. Not outside of you, but within you. And that's where the real transformation begins. If this message resonated with you, don't ignore that feeling. Take it seriously. Reflect on it. And if you're ready to continue this journey of awareness and growth, stay connected to this space. Subscribe to Return to Awakening. Share your thoughts in the comments, and be part of a community that's choosing to grow consciously, honestly, and with purpose. Because this isn't about becoming someone new. It's about finally becoming who you were meant to be. And the deeper you go into this journey, the more you begin to realize something most people never stop to question. You were never meant to stay the same. But for so long, you were taught to stay consistent, stay predictable, stay within what people expect of you. So when you begin to change, it can feel like you're doing something wrong, like you're breaking some invisible rule. But you're not. You're finally listening. There's a quiet intelligence within you, a deeper awareness that doesn't speak in noise, but in subtle shifts, in discomfort, in intuition, in those moments where something just doesn't feel right anymore. That voice isn't here to confuse you. It's here to guide you. But the challenge is, it doesn't shout. And in a world full of distractions, it's easy to ignore. Scrolling, noise, constant stimulation, all of it pulling you away from the one place where clarity actually exists. Within. And maybe that's why you've been feeling the need to step back, to be alone more often, to think, to disconnect so you can reconnect. Not because you're becoming distant from the world, but because you're becoming closer to yourself. And that shift changes how you see everything. You begin to notice how much of your life was shaped by habit, not intention. How many decisions were made out of fear, not alignment. How often you said yes when you really meant no. And that realization can be heavy. Because awareness brings responsibility. Once you see it, you can't ignore it. You either grow or you stay stuck knowing you could have chosen differently. And that's where courage comes in. Not loud, dramatic courage, but quiet courage. The kind that shows up in small decisions. Choosing to protect your peace. Choosing to set boundaries. Choosing to walk away, even when it's hard. Because growth isn't always about adding something new. Sometimes it's about removing what was never right for you in the first place. And that process can feel like loss. Letting go of certain people. Old versions of yourself. Beliefs that once felt safe. But what you're really doing is creating space. Space for clarity. Space for authenticity. Space for a life that actually feels like yours. And here's something most people don't talk about. As you grow, you may feel misunderstood. Not because others are against you, but because they're used to a version of you that no longer exists. They remember who you were, but they don't fully see who you're becoming. And that can feel lonely. But it's also part of the process. Because this journey isn't about being understood by everyone. It's about understanding yourself. Deeply, honestly, without filters, without pretending. And when you reach that level of self-understanding, something shifts. You stop chasing validation. You stop explaining yourself to people who aren't ready to understand. You stop shrinking to fit into spaces that no longer align. And instead, you start choosing yourself, not out of ego, but out of clarity, because you finally see your worth without needing someone else to confirm it. And that kind of awareness, it changes how you move through life. It changes what you tolerate, what you pursue, what you walk away from. And slowly, without forcing it, your life begins to reflect that inner shift. Not perfectly, not instantly, but genuinely. Because when your internal world changes, your external world has no choice but to follow. Even if it takes time, even if the path isn't clear yet. And right now, you might still be in that in-between phase, where things feel uncertain, where you're not fully who you used to be, but not fully who you're becoming either. And that's okay. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need all the answers right now. Because this part of the journey isn't about knowing. It's about becoming aware, becoming honest, becoming real with yourself in ways you've never been before. And that kind of depth, it takes time, and in that time, something subtle begins to happen. You start noticing the patterns that once controlled you, losing their grip. Not all at once, not in some dramatic, overnight change, but gradually. The reaction that used to be instant now has a pause. The emotion that used to overwhelm you now feels observable. The situation that once drained you now feels optional. And that pause, that space between what happens and how you respond, that's where your power is returning. Because for so long, life may have felt like something that was happening to you. Circumstances, people, emotions, all pulling you in different directions. But now, you're beginning to see that you have a say in how you experience it all. Not control over everything that happens, but control over how deeply it defines you. And that realization is quiet, but life-changing. Because it means you're no longer completely tied to your past reactions. You're no longer repeating the same cycles unconsciously. You're starting to choose. And choice is where transformation becomes real. But here's the part that many people don't expect. As you become more aware, you may also become more sensitive, more aware of energy, more aware of tone, more aware of what feels genuine and what doesn't. Things that once went unnoticed now stand out clearly. And that can feel overwhelming at times. Like you're seeing too much, feeling too much. But you're not becoming too much. You're becoming more in tune. And being in tune requires balance. Because awareness without grounding can lead to overthinking. So in this phase, it's important to stay present. Not lost in every thought. Not analyzing every feeling. Just observing. Letting things be what they are, without immediately trying to fix or define them. Because not everything needs a label. Some things just need to be felt and understood over time. And the more you allow that process, the more clarity naturally unfolds. Without force, without pressure, and slowly, you begin to trust yourself in a way you never did before. Not because everything is perfect, but because you've seen yourself handle what once felt impossible. You've seen yourself grow, adapt, shift, and that builds a different kind of confidence. Not loud, not dependent on external validation, but steady, grounded, real. And from that place, you start making decisions differently. You stop chasing what looks good and start choosing what feels right. You stop holding onto things out of fear and start releasing them out of understanding. You stop asking, "What will people think?" and start asking, "Is this true to who I am now?" And those questions, They guide you into a life that actually reflects you, not the version of you shaped by expectations, but the version of you shaped by awareness. And the more you move in that direction, the less you feel the need to rush, because you begin to understand. This isn't a race. There's no final destination where everything suddenly makes perfect sense. This is a process, a continuous unfolding, where each layer you uncover leads to another level of understanding. And instead of fearing that, you begin to appreciate it, because it means you're evolving. You're not stuck. You're not stagnant. You're in motion, even if it feels slow. And that's something important to hold on to, because in moments of doubt, it's easy to think nothing is changing. But change doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes, it shows up in the way you think, in the way you respond, in the way you choose peace over chaos, even when no one is watching. And those quiet changes, they are shaping your entire life, from the inside out. And the more this inner shift continues, the more you begin to detach from things that once defined your identity. Not in a cold or careless way, but in a clear, grounded way. You start to see that you are not your past mistakes. You are not the roles you were forced to play. You are not the expectations that were placed on you. Those were chapters, not your entire story. And for the first time, you begin to separate who you are from what you've experienced. That realization alone can feel like a release, like a weight you didn't even realize you were carrying, slowly lifting. Because when you stop identifying with everything that happened to you, you create space to decide who you want to be moving forward. And that's where things become intentional. You're no longer just reacting to life. You're responding to it with awareness. And that shift changes how you handle pressure. Situations that once triggered anxiety now invite reflection. Moments that once made you feel powerless now challenge you to stay grounded. Not perfectly, but differently. And that difference is everything, because it means you're no longer operating from survival. You're stepping into understanding. And understanding brings a kind of calm that doesn't depend on everything going right. It comes from knowing that no matter what happens, you can face it with clarity. You can process it without losing yourself. You can move through it without becoming it. And that's a level of strength most people spend their whole lives trying to reach. But here's something else that starts to happen. You begin to value your energy differently. You become more protective of your time, more selective with your attention, more aware of what drains you and what actually nourishes you. And because of that, you might start pulling away from certain environments, not out of judgment, but out of alignment, because you can feel the difference now. You can feel when something is genuine and when it's forced. You can feel when something supports your growth and when it keeps you stuck. And once you feel that clearly, it becomes harder to ignore, even if it means making uncomfortable choices, even if it means standing alone for a while. Because deep down you know, peace is more valuable than fitting in. Clarity is more valuable than approval. And truth is more valuable than comfort. So you begin to choose differently. You choose silence over noise, growth over familiarity, depth over surface-level connections. And yes, that path can feel isolating at times, but it's also where you meet a different version of yourself, a more grounded version, a more honest version, a version that isn't trying to prove anything, but simply exists with awareness. And in that space, you start to notice something powerful. You no longer feel the need to chase everything. You don't feel the same urgency to be everywhere, do everything. impress everyone. Because you're no longer searching for yourself in external things. You're finding yourself within. And that changes the pace of your life. It slows you down. Not in a negative way, but in a meaningful way. You start to move with intention. You start to notice details you once overlooked. Moments feel deeper. Conversations feel more real. Your thoughts feel more aligned with who you truly are. And even though the outside world may still feel chaotic at times, there's a part of you that remains steady. A quiet center. And that center becomes your anchor. Something you can return to, no matter what's happening around you. And the more you reconnect with that, the less lost you feel. Even when things are uncertain. Even when the path ahead isn't fully clear. Because you begin to understand something most people overlook. Clarity doesn't always come before the journey. Sometimes, it comes because you had the courage to keep moving without it. And as you keep moving forward, even without having everything figured out, something deeper begins to settle within you. A quiet acceptance. Not of everything being perfect, but of everything being part of your process. You stop fighting every uncomfortable emotion. You stop resisting every uncertain moment. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And instead, you begin to ask better questions. What is this teaching me? What am I starting to see now that I couldn't see before? Who am I becoming through this? And those questions shift your perspective. Because now, you're not just experiencing life. You're learning from it. And learning creates meaning. Even in the difficult moments. Especially in the difficult moments. Because those are the moments that reveal you to yourself. Not the easy days. Not the comfortable routines. But the moments where you feel challenged, stretched, uncertain. That's where your depth is formed. That's where your awareness sharpens. That's where you begin to see what truly matters and what never really did. And as this clarity deepens, you may notice that your tolerance for certain things continues to fade. Old patterns don't feel as tempting. Old distractions don't feel as satisfying. Old versions of yourself don't feel as familiar. And instead of forcing yourself back into those spaces, you begin to accept that you've changed. That your needs are different now. Your mindset is different now. Your priorities are different now. And that's not something to question. That's something to respect. Because growth requires honesty. And honesty sometimes asks you to let go of what once felt like home. Not because it was bad, but because it's no longer where you belong. And that realization can be emotional. Because it's not always easy to outgrow things that once meant so much to you. But part of evolving is allowing yourself to move forward without carrying everything with you. Not every habit. Not every connection. Not every belief. Some things were meant to shape you, not stay with you forever. And when you understand that, letting go becomes less about loss and more about alignment, more about creating space for what actually fits the person you're becoming. And in that space, something new begins to emerge. A sense of direction. Not a perfectly clear roadmap, but a feeling, a quiet knowing that you're moving in the right direction, even if you can't fully explain why. And that feeling, it becomes your compass, because it doesn't come from external validation. It comes from alignment, from living in a way that feels true to you. And the more you follow that, the stronger it becomes, the clearer it becomes, until one day, you realize something that once felt impossible. You trust yourself. Not blindly. Not arrogantly. But deeply. You trust your decisions. You trust your intuition. You trust your ability to navigate life, even when it's uncertain. And that trust, it changes how you face challenges. You no longer see obstacles as something that will break you. You begin to see them as something that will reveal you, refine you, strengthen you, because you've already experienced what it means to grow through discomfort. You've already seen what happens when you stay present instead of running away. And that experience becomes your foundation, a reminder that no matter what comes next, you are capable of meeting it with awareness, with patience, with strength that doesn't need to be loud to be real. And slowly, without forcing it, you begin to feel more at home within yourself. Not because everything outside has settled, but because something inside has. A calm, a grounded presence, a sense that you're no longer searching for who you are. You're living it, moment by moment, choice by choice. And that's where everything begins to align, naturally. Not perfectly, but meaningfully. And the more you live from that place, the more you start to notice how differently you experience the same world. The same situations feel lighter. The same challenges feel more manageable. The same uncertainties don't shake you the way they used to. Not because life suddenly became easier, but because you became more centered. You're no longer reacting from every emotion that passes through you. You're observing it, understanding it, letting it move without letting it control you. And that creates a kind of emotional freedom that can't be taken from you, because it's not dependent on circumstances. It's built from within. And in that space, you begin to see people differently too. You start to understand that everyone is moving through their own level of awareness, their own struggles, their own patterns, their own pace of growth. And instead of taking everything personally, you begin to see things with more clarity, more patience, more emotional distance where needed. Not because you don't care, but because you understand. And understanding changes how you respond. You no longer feel the need to engage in every argument. You no longer feel the need to prove your perspective. You no longer feel the need to carry what was never yours to begin with. And that shift, it protects your peace in ways you didn't know were possible. Because you're no longer absorbing everything around you. You're choosing what deserves your energy and what doesn't. And that choice becomes a quiet form of self-respect. A boundary that doesn't need to be explained to everyone. It simply exists in the way you move, in the way you respond, in the way you walk away when something doesn't align. And over time, those choices begin to shape your reality. You find yourself in different conversations, different environments, different mindsets, not because you forced it, but because you outgrew what once held you in place. And now, you're naturally moving toward what reflects your current state of awareness. And this is where something powerful begins to unfold. You stop looking for constant validation that you're on the right path, because you start to realize there isn't just one path. There's your path, and it doesn't have to look like anyone else. It doesn't have to make sense to everyone. It doesn't have to follow a timeline that society expects. Because your growth is personal, deeply personal. And the more you accept that, the less pressure you feel to compare your journey to others. You stop measuring your progress based on what you see around you, and start measuring it based on how you feel within. More grounded, more aware, more aligned. And that becomes enough. Because for the first time, you're not chasing a version of success that was defined by others. You're creating one that actually reflects you, your values, your peace, your truth. And that kind of success, it feels different. It feels calm. It feels real. It feels sustainable. Not something you have to constantly maintain to impress others, but something you naturally live because it's authentic. And in that authenticity, you find a different kind of confidence, not built on perfection, but built on acceptance. You accept that you're still growing, still learning, still evolving. And instead of seeing that as a weakness, you see it as your strength, because it means you're open, flexible, willing to see more, understand more, become more. And that openness, it keeps you moving forward, without pressure, without forcing outcomes, just steady, intentional growth. And that's where your life begins to feel less like something you're trying to control, and more like something you're consciously experiencing, fully present, fully aware, and quietly becoming everything you needed all along. And as that awareness continues to deepen, you begin to notice something even more subtle. You're no longer afraid of your own thoughts. Before, silence might have felt uncomfortable. You needed distraction, noise, movement, anything to avoid sitting with what was inside. But now, there are moments where you actually welcome that silence, because within it you find clarity. Not all at once, not in perfect sentences or clear answers, but in pieces, small realizations, honest reflections, truths that rise to the surface when everything else becomes quiet. And those truths, they don't always feel easy. Sometimes they challenge you. Sometimes they ask you to admit things you've been avoiding. But they also free you. Because the moment you stop running from what you feel is the moment you start understanding it. And understanding removes a lot of the fear. You begin to see that your thoughts are not your enemy. Your emotions are not weaknesses. They are signals, guides, indicators of what needs attention, what needs healing, what needs to change. And the more you listen, the more you begin to respond to yourself with compassion instead of criticism. You stop being so hard on yourself for not having everything figured out. You stop judging yourself for past decisions. You stop holding yourself to impossible standards that were never truly yours. And instead, you begin to treat yourself with patience, with understanding, with the same level of care you've given to others, but rarely gave to yourself. And that shift, it changes your relationship with who you are. You're no longer at war with yourself. You're learning how to support yourself. And when that happens, everything else starts to feel different. Because the way you see yourself influences the way you see everything around you. You no longer seek constant approval, because you're no longer rejecting yourself internally. You no longer feel the need to prove your worth, because you're starting to recognize it on your own. And that recognition, it doesn't come from perfection. It comes from honesty, from seeing yourself clearly, strengths and flaws, and still choosing to grow. And as you continue in this space, you begin to trust your pace. You stop comparing how fast others are moving. You stop feeling behind, because you realize there is no universal timeline for becoming who you are. Some lessons take longer. Some realizations come later. Some changes happen slowly, layer by layer. And that's not a failure. That's depth. Because real transformation isn't rushed. It's built carefully, intentionally, through experience, reflection, and time. And the more you accept that, the more peaceful your journey becomes. You're no longer in a hurry to arrive somewhere. You're present in where you are, learning from it, growing through it, becoming stronger within it. And even when things feel uncertain, there's a quiet part of you now that doesn't panic the way it used to, because it knows you've made it through uncertainty before. You've navigated confusion before. You've grown through moments where you felt completely lost. And somehow, you found your way forward. Not perfectly, but enough. And that enough, it matters more than you think, because it proves something important. You are capable of moving forward, even when you don't have all the answers, even when the path isn't fully clear, even when doubt tries to return. And that capability, it becomes your quiet strength, a strength that doesn't need recognition, a strength that doesn't need to be seen, because you feel it, in the way you handle things now, in the way you carry yourself now, in the way you choose growth, even when it's uncomfortable. And that choice, made again and again in small, unseen moments, is what continues to shape who you are becoming. And as you keep choosing that path, something else begins to fade. The constant need to explain yourself. Before, you may have felt like you had to justify your decisions, your growth, your distance, your silence. You felt the pressure to make others understand why you were changing. But now, you're starting to realize that not everyone is meant to understand every version of you. And that's okay, because your journey isn't something that needs approval to be valid. It just needs honesty. And the more honest you become with yourself, the less you feel the need to seek permission from others. You begin to move with quiet confidence, not announcing every change, not explaining every choice, just living in alignment, even if it goes unnoticed. And that kind of movement, it's powerful because it's real. It's not driven by attention or validation. It's driven by clarity. And clarity simplifies things. You no longer overcomplicate decisions that once drained you. You don't sit in endless loops of overthinking. Because deep down, you already know what feels right. You just had to learn how to trust it. And now that you are, life begins to feel less like a constant battle, and more like a series of conscious choices. Some easy, some difficult, but all meaningful. And even when you face setbacks, they don't break you the way they used to. They pause you. They slow you down. They give you something to reflect on. But they don't define you, because you've separated your identity from your circumstances. You understand now that a moment doesn't define your entire journey. And that understanding gives you resilience, a steady kind of strength that allows you to keep going, without losing yourself in the process. And as this resilience builds, you start to notice how much lighter you feel. Not because life has no challenges, but because you're no longer carrying everything at once. You've learned to let go, to release what isn't yours, to stop holding onto what you can't control, to stop replaying what's already passed. And that release, it creates space. Space in your mind, space in your heart, space in your life. And in that space, you begin to experience moments of stillness that feel different. Moments where nothing is urgent. Nothing is pulling you in every direction. Just presence, just awareness, just you existing without pressure. And those moments, they remind you of something simple but powerful. You don't always need to be doing something to be moving forward. Sometimes, growth is happening in the stillness, in the pauses, in the moments where you're not forcing anything, just allowing. And the more you allow, the more naturally things begin to align. Not in a perfect, predictable way, but in a way that feels right for you. Opportunities begin to feel clearer. Decisions begin to feel easier. Paths begin to reveal themselves, step by step. Not because everything is planned out, but because you're paying attention now. You're present, and presence changes everything. Because when you're fully present, you stop missing the subtle signs of your own growth. You notice how far you've come, how much you've learned, how much you've shifted, even in ways others may never see. And that awareness, it builds a quiet sense of gratitude, not just for the good moments, but for the difficult ones too, because you can now see their purpose, not as something that was meant to hold you back, but as something that helped you become more aware, more grounded, more real. And when you reach that level of understanding, you stop wishing your past was different. You start appreciating how it shaped you. Not perfectly, but meaningfully. And that meaning, it stays with you, guiding you, grounding you, reminding you that everything you've gone through has been part of something deeper, something that's still unfolding. Right now,